The world has changed dramatically since the murder of George Floyd just 1 year ago this week. Or has it really? According to these voices from around our state, the answer is mixed.
We're surviving. We're only surviving, but we're not thriving. And when it gets to the point where I can see that we're thriving, then I can truly say that we're making some steps forward.
Growing up as a kid, you're always told you have to work 5 times as hard, right, to others people's one, right? Like you always have to outwork, and it feels like that.
It doesn't seem like there's a certain type that this happens to, right? So then you could say, oh, my kid's safe. That's not true. It could be me. It could be you.
The fact that I've been to rallies where there were more white people than there were people of color fighting for that cause, or it was equally divided. The fact that you got more people who are not affected by the actions are now in the street lifting their voice. I think that's the common denominator.
I was actually very impressed and moved by my generation, honestly. I really feel like we came together and we just simply said, no, like, we don't want this. We're going to change it.
For nearly a year, we've examined the state of race and the inequities facing people of color on housing and education.
We have wealth gaps, we have employment gaps, we have housing gaps. So all of these things are happening, and we see it happen when a 5-year-old shows up and has been impacted by all of these things.
We've looked at the need for police reform and efforts by some to suppress the vote.
We got to this point because there are some people in this country that have a lot of anxiety over the browning of America.
And we've witnessed how COVID-19 has disproportionately devastated Black and brown communities.
The patients will tell you they really cannot prioritize health because they're basically, trying to survive.
Now it's time to assess where we are on social justice efforts. I'm Dan Lothian, and tonight, in partnership with the NAACP Boston branch, the Boston Globe, and World Channel, we'll be taking a look at the road ahead. Joining me for tonight's discussion are Tanisha Sullivan, president of the NAACP Boston branch, Dr. Jamila Liscott, assistant professor of social justice education at the University of Massachusetts, and Shirley Leong, business columnist for the Boston Globe. Thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
So throughout the show, we'll also be trying to answer some questions that you or our audience have submitted. So let's start out with the biggest question and the one that's hardest to answer. Where are we today when it comes to racial equity in this country? And to all of you, that's a difficult question, right? So much has been compressed within a year. Tanisha, how do you see it looking back over the past year?
I definitely believe that we have started to see progress in a way that we haven't before. It's certainly the murder of George Floyd really sparked for many across this country an awakening related to racial inequity that has indeed engaged more people who were not previously engaged in this fight. When we think about the business community, when we think about certainly the multiracial and multicultural coalitions that have been built over the past 12 months in particular. The question, though, is going to be sustainability and impact. Whether we are going to be able to really endure for the time it is going to take for us to see the type of change that we need, and whether that change is going to have the impact it needs to have on the quality of life for people of color in this country. That remains an open question.
And to that issue of sustainability over the long haul, really, Jamila, maybe if you could jump in here. What are your thoughts on the fact that now people who have been cooped up for the past year are getting out, moving on, if you will, with their lives. And so they'll get distracted. There'll be other things that come into play. And will that perhaps play a role in some of these efforts that have started and in terms of how they will play out over the long haul?
When you say people, I'm thinking that it depends on what kind of people. It's a privilege to not be affected by this in your everyday life. And so for people who look like me, we don't have the privilege of moving beyond our household and forgetting what is happening in our nation. So I would say that we should still expect that the same diligence, the same labor towards equity and justice is happening, especially as those of us who are justice-oriented begin to convene in person, knowing that this saturates our everyday lives, whether we're at home or whether we're moving about.
Right. And Shirley, is there a sense that a lot of the things that we have seen, people are talking about this, people are protesting in the streets, do you get a sense that there's more of that than the actual doing component? Is there a balance of it? What's your sense?
I mean, I was going to use the same exact word Tanisha was used, which is awakening. And I would say specifically, there's a real awakening in white people. I think that to me is the biggest change. There's incredible awareness now. I think before there was a sense that systemic racism, it's not real. And I think now there's a lot more awareness that it is real. And that, yes, there have been all these policies aimed at equal opportunity and laws, and we've had them for decades, but none of them, it ain't working. Mm-hmm. And there is a sense that we cannot go on as we have gone on in the decades before. We have to do something different. And, right now, I think there is a lot of, I think there are certain people, there are certain sectors doing a lot, but we also have to realize that it's not 1 year's work. It's going to be many years of work. And so we're going to be doing a show like this for the next 10 years. I'm sorry to say that. We should if we want to keep on top of this topic.
But is it the American people, when we look back at other things, and clearly this is one of those, it's been a year-long experience for not only Americans, but this has been a global problem, right? A global issue. And oftentimes, though, as we look inwardly at Americans, we tend to, we're very much on top of an issue, and it's something that can be all-consuming, but we tend to get over it. We tend to forget. And it's true that people of color have been experiencing this long before the past year and will continue to experience and live it. But I'm wondering if there is that danger of, we need to move on with our lives and start focusing on some other things. And so the intensity that we've seen around these important issues around equity and inclusion will fade.
Yeah, I think, really good point, Dan. And I think particularly in this moment, we have to remain diligent and focused about keeping the issue of racial equity on the front burner. We cannot allow really any gap to occur because indeed, our nation will be quick to turn its eye. And it's not just because, there are so many other things to distract us. I believe it is in part because this is the issue that has truly, if anything, has held us back as a nation. It is our wrestling with this issue of systemic racism and its impact on so many people in this country. To tackle the issue requires us to reflect upon ourselves. And that's a difficult thing to do. And so I actually agree. Shirley said it partly in jest. I actually agree that we need to keep having these conversations, but we also need to make sure that the conversations are driving action and that we really do that we are truly more intentional about designing and implementing public policies that will dismantle systemic racism going forward.
And as to those policies, do you think that is that's a reality? I mean, we're so polarized now, and it's so hard for anything to get done, whether it's on the state level or on the national scale. Is that doable?
Dan, I wanted to say one thing along those lines, which is if this George Floyd murder happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I think we might have lost our focus, but I think because it happened during this pandemic, I think the pandemic changes everything. It stopped all of us in our tracks and made us rethink. And now as we emerge out of this pandemic, all of us are thinking, this is an opportunity to hit the reset button on society. And we can't bring racism along into our post-pandemic lives. How do we get rid of it? And I think there's a new sense of urgency because of the pandemic. It has forced us to think about how we have lived our lives, how we run this country, and how can life be different.
And Jamila, I'm wondering if do we have someone or a group of people who can be the leaders to take this to the next, over the next few years? Past movements have had leaders who have stood up and been really the fire and the fuel to keep a lot of discussions around various issues going. And I'm wondering, is it the Black Lives Matter movement, or are there others who have risen up to keep this fire going over the few next years?
Yeah, just echoing what others have shared. I don't want us to forget about the organizers on the ground who have been doing this work and keeping that fire for so long. And it's a collective movement that's happening. It's not about one romantic singular leader, but what it means to be invested in the collective possibility of change. And if you look at what Stacey Abrams did over in Georgia, if you look at what's happening across, like even this notion of protest people sometimes misconstrue as random collective outrage, but it's organizers who organize protests, and those protests maybe build public spectacle and momentum so that there's that systemic change that they've been advocating for on the ground for a long time. So it all happens in tandem.
Well, exhaustion, impatience, and deep sadness have been common themes among people of color this past year. Take the case of Makita Van Horn, one of only a few Black teachers in the predominantly white school system of Fall River.
It was hard. I've had students had tears in their eyes and say, Ms. V, why is the world like this? Why do they have to be like this towards us? And that's one thing I find the hardest to really explain to them, for them to understand that I'm sorry that it's like this, but we just have to learn how to deal with it.
You're in a unique position where you are one of the few Black people in a leadership role who can really help to mold young minds and hearts. Is there a certain amount, with that responsibility, is there a certain amount of pressure on you, and is there a sense of exhaustion after you look at the past year and this conversation that is just always there?
Oh my gosh, exhausting is not even the word. I just feel that pressure regularly. First of all, the pressure really comes from the fact of, I wouldn't say I can't genuinely entirely be myself, but I always have to put my best foot out there. I always have to look the best. I always have to make sure I talk the best or I act the best way, and make sure I always have a smile on my face, make sure I'm always greeting people, because I don't ever want anyone to think that I'm angry or I'm aggressive. And including the pressure that I feel from that, I always feel the pressure of having to, even though I don't want to be that voice, I still have to. And if I can't educate or I don't educate, then how are we going to change the mindset of others or the world around us to see that we are just as much as people as they are? I became vocal with a lot of my staff members, especially admin. I guess that's where it opened their eyes to what's the reality outside of, I guess, their world. I told them in the most professional, utmost way that, this is hard. This is what I'm facing. You might not relate to it, but this is the reality of my reality.
Makita has really risen to the challenges she faced in Fall River. She's been instrumental in getting a diversity and equity and inclusion committee started, and she's feeling very optimistic about the future. So to all of you, and maybe we start with you, Tanisha, have you heard this story before from others similar to what we just heard?
Absolutely. It is a familiar story because it comes out of shared pain and shared struggle, right? And so, yes, And I think one of the things that's really important for us to do is to continue to tell our stories and to share our experiences so that it is clear that we're not alone in this, and to allow that to serve as really fuel for the work, the collective work that we have to do together. So yes, absolutely. I've heard the story. I've experienced the story. It's real.
Right. And is there this frustration, Jamila, of feeling like you have to answer for all people of color. You have to be the one to explain. You have to be the one to educate. Is that something that you personally have felt, you have seen played out in the workplace, maybe virtually even as well?
Yes, it's a very subversive way that this kind of racism and exploitation functions, because then the emotional labor, the psychological labor, the burden falls on us to do the work. And instead of the institution transforming, it becomes the labor of the same people of color that are navigating these issues to address it. And I think, just echoing what was said before, what needs to happen is we need to keep telling our stories, but we also need to be intentional to start our stories with joy, the power of who we are, and not just with the trauma, the pain, and the wounds that everyone gets to witness.
Shirley, I'm wondering if any of this has become more real for you as you've watched what's not only played out for African Americans, but also for Asian Americans in this country.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm Chinese American, and this is the first time in my life. I was born in America. I'm Chinese. They call me an ABC, American born Chinese. And it's the first time in my life that I live in fear. And the March 16th murders in Atlanta, 8 people lost their lives, including 6 Asian American women. That shook me to my core. And those women, those victims, I saw my own mother. I saw my girlfriends, my aunties. It could have been me. And what was scary at that moment is, we've had a year-long rise in anti-Asian sentiment. And I didn't know if the shooting was the culmination of violence against Asian Americans or just the beginning. And so right now, for me, it's this fear. It's not abstract. When I walk outside in my leafy suburb, I try not to walk alone. I always have the dog with me. I try not to be on my cell phone so I can make sure I'm aware of my surroundings. And at first I was thinking, well, maybe it's just me. But then I was listening to something from Senator Hirono. She now, when she goes out for walks, she fears, and she doesn't listen to her audio, podcasts anymore because she's scared. Can I share one more story?
Sure, go ahead.
I know I'm going on a little bit, but the fear, it's inside you, and it pops up unexpectedly. I remember I had to go speak at a Asian American Solidarity rally in Quincy in April. It was a beautiful sunny day, and usually you get butterflies before speaking, right? Public speaking. But at this time, I was worried about getting shot. What if there is a mass shooting where there's a lot of Asian Americans being gathering? What if I'm shot here? And, of course, it was fine. I'm here. I am not, I'm fine. But the very first speaker that day was Filipina pastor. And she also talked about her fear, her new fear of being shot. One of her happy places is to go to the 99 Ranch Market in Quincy, where she could buy all these, ingredients to make Filipino dishes. And right after the Atlanta murders, she goes shopping to what normally would be her happy place. And she thinks to herself, what if there's a shooting here? What if there's a shooter, a mass shooter? And what if I am here with my 1-year-old? What do I do? That is what it's like to be an Asian American these days.
A new reality for Asian Americans, and something that, other people of color as well have been dealing with in this country for decades. I want to bring in a question here from one of our viewers. They're asking, are we just talking to ourselves? How do we reach out to others? Jamila, do you want to jump in on that question?
I'm curious about the question, who is other?
Right.
Yeah, how do we reach out to others if we're thinking about, there was a statement that went around the internet when there was this mass push for unity, and the statement said there is no unity without accountability. And so when we think about reaching out to others, we have to make sure that we're not so much pushing for the performance of unity, that we're not invested in the accountability of those who are counterintuitive to the values of justice and equity that we care about. And so it requires systemic level change. And I feel like there are enough of us to do that work, and because it has to be advocated for, whether the others are for it or against it.
Tanisha, want to jump in on that question as well?
I couldn't agree more. And, and I actually think, this accountability piece that Jamila raises is critically important. We haven't gotten there yet. We haven't had those conversations yet, right? Because, we certainly have experienced the beginning of an awakening and a heightened awareness across this country, across the Commonwealth. But we haven't gotten to the accountability conversations. We haven't dug deeply into the historical context of how we got here in order to understand how we are collectively going to emerge from this moment. And so I actually believe that, as we look forward into 2021 and into 2022, those are the types of conversations that we really need to start having. And for those who are truly committed to working together to achieve racial equity, it will be incumbent upon all of us to be able to stick to it through those very difficult conversations.
Difficult conversations. We've been focusing on those and some of the problems that are existing out there, but there have also been some developments on key issues this year. First off, back to you, Tanisha, one of the most volatile issues is police reform. We've seen lawmakers at both the local and national level call for the creation of oversight panels or eliminating qualified immunity, even cutting police department budgets. But are these demands becoming a reality anywhere? And if so, are they working?
Yeah, what we are seeing across the country in municipalities and in certain states, including, our very own Commonwealth, truly is movement as it relates to certain aspects of policing reform. So we are seeing increased awareness that there is a need for greater accountability and transparency in policing so that it can certainly help to support trust in law enforcement and public safety writ large. We are seeing, again, kind of reform happen. What we have yet to see, quite frankly, is holistic reform implemented in any jurisdiction. And so that work continues. And again, this is another one where hopefully this year we will see at the state level and at municipal levels implementation of reforms. But really the big question that is on the mind of many Americans is, what are we going to do on the national front? What is going to happen specifically with the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, for example? Many of us were hoping that we would have seen meaningful movement on that this week. We have not. There is, for the sake of our nation on this particular issue, we have to have meaningful reform on the national level. We must have national accountability standards. We must have really use of force reform at the national level. And yes, we have to tackle qualified immunity and to reform it in such a way that it helps to increase public safety and accountability.
And Shirley, maybe if you want to jump in on this issue of police reform, as you've seen, many things have been discussed, many things are being proposed. What's your sense of what will actually happen?
Just like everything, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion and not enough action. And we're finding that that in the police reform, they have to fight unions. They have to fight politicians who've been supported by police unions. So there's a lot of work ahead. And it's been slow at the Boston level, not just the national level, but also Boston in terms of trying to fix the police. It's a really it's a hard establishment to drive any change there. But I do feel like there is a lot of focus on police reform, and I think we'll see that for the next year as well.
And Jamila, quickly to you on this same issue of police reform, one of the things you will hear from when we're having conversations around this, oftentimes people say, well, everyone's talking about police reform, and then there's another news report about yet another case where someone is shot by an unarmed man, is shot by a police officer, or there's some form of abuse that's taking place. How can you reconcile that? How do you respond when those kinds of questions are asked?
Yeah, I respond by saying the truth of the matter is not about reforming a broken system, but imagining new possibilities for public safety that don't involve that level of violence. The conversation that's become very polarizing around defunding the police is more so about what it means to fund the social services that are preemptive in mitigating the kind of violences and harm that police respond to, and having multiple avenues for responding to issues across our community that don't necessarily require one particular type of action. And so my response is that the system is not working as is, and it needs to be completely reimagined and not just reformed.
I want to move us now into our second theme here tonight, the current feeling that things are still not where they need to be and conversations about race are still difficult. Erin Danielle owns and operates a beauty salon in Cambridge.
We did have a lot of conversation about George Floyd. It was funny. So we would be in here talking, and then if someone white came in, we would be like, everybody be quiet about it, right? Because I guess they didn't want to hurt anybody else's feelings, because as people, that's not what we do. We don't, we try to keep it okay, right? But I think keeping it okay is the wrong thing.
When it comes to the state of race, do you think things are getting better or worse, and why?
The same or worse. I don't think they're getting better. And I don't think just because Chauvin was found guilty, it's gotten better. It's nice, and we think yay. But we don't know how much time he's going to get. It's up to that judge, right, to make the decision on how much time he gets, and then that will make us feel a little bit better. But what will make us feel a lot better is if it doesn't happen at all. But it's really happening to us as Black people. I say to the clients, I think it'll get better when it happens to them, when it happens to their children, to their men.
I want all of you to jump in on this issue of having these kinds of conversations, and we've touched on this already about talking about this issue, but how can these conversations be had, especially now as we're emerging from our homes and going out in public places and having more conversations around dinner tables, around backyards? How can these conversations be had in a climate where there are some people, white people, who feel if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to get in trouble? So they don't really want to engage in the kind of meaningful conversation that can move this whole debate forward.
I do this work a lot with a lot of white people. And one of the first things I say is that your impetus to protect your comfort over taking the emotional risk that it takes to be about this work is a sign of privilege. And so the conversation becomes how many of us as people of color have been conditioned to protect white comfort at the expense of our own wellness. And if we don't challenge that, then we have no hope of moving forward in any way.
So it's white comfort, but for the fear around the concern that if someone is white and they say the wrong thing, it won't be viewed as I'm trying to learn more, I'm trying to be educated. People fear that they could be ostracized or lose their jobs or worse, right? How can you encourage white people to have those conversations and feel like there is safe space to talk about race?
Am I answering this?
I can continue, but
yeah, you can continue.
yes, me,
And then we'll move on. I want all of you to jump in. I want all of you to jump in on it. But go ahead, Jamila.
No, because it's not about safe space. It's about brave space, right? It's not about that. That's not what it's about. Our lives are not safe, right? So it's not about safe space. It's also these conversations. If you're going to have these conversations, it's also about building meaningful relationships and coalitions, and not across racial lines of difference that can actually sustain that level of bravery, right? Just like in any kind of relational dynamic, you don't move into a certain level of intimacy and vulnerability without rapport and relationship that can sustain it. And so I think we have to think about that context and move away from the notion of comfort and think about what brave action needs to happen.
Such a great point. Shirley?
I was going to say, the being uncomfortable goes both ways. White people have to be uncomfortable, and people of color have to be uncomfortable confronting racism and I can't tell you, I have to say in the last year, I have been, I've found the courage to confront. Normally I wouldn't have said anything about something, but now I say something, and I say because I want it to change. And I say it, I think about a story I just wrote about the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation. They did this great report on how to close the racial wealth gap in Massachusetts, right? And they focused the report on looking at Black and brown communities. They didn't look at the Asian American community at all. And there's a lot of disparities and poverty in the Asian American community, and they didn't look at it. And normally I would have just written the story, and it's a good report. I wouldn't have said anything about Asian Americans, but I did. I wrote it in my story. I said it to the foundation. I said, next time you really need to look at Asian Americans as well.
And why did you decide to do that this time?
Well, because right now, the moment we're in for Asian Americans, we're often left out of the conversation about how to close the racial wealth gap. And, when you look at some of the numbers, Asian American households are poorer than, white households, poorer than some Black households. And so we can't be labeled the model minority. Yes, some of us are very wealthy, but some of us are the poorest of the poor. And that group is being left behind, being left out of the conversation. And so I think in this next year, especially what's happening to Asian Americans, I think there's more awareness now of the Asian American community and what we're going through, and how we need to be part of, closing the racial wealth gap as well.
Tanisha, I like what Jamila said. I like what Jamila said about, it's not as if you're just going to jump into a conversation if you're a white person and say, now let's have this conversation. That there really has to be a relationship that makes that kind of conversation happen. You agree with that?
Well, I actually want to add to it because it's not just about how white people feel in these situations. I want to be clear that there's risk for people of color, for Black people, for brown people in these conversations as well. And in some respects, even more risk because of power dynamics. And so I think it's important for us to understand where we are shifting the responsibility for being brave and creating space. That's the only piece that I would add to the conversation, because Jamila just hit the nail right on the head. This piece around relationship is critically important. But so very often, as Marquita shared at the beginning of the program, so very often the responsibility is placed on us to create the brave space, for us to be gracious in allowing for mistakes or for things to be said the wrong way. And that is not given to us in return. We are expected to, at all times, remain composed, at all times to be the forgiving ones, at all times to say it the right way. And so I do think it's important to understand that there's a mutuality to this at a minimum, and at some level, it is incumbent upon white people to take on more of the responsibility and be more vulnerable in these situations.
Very good points raised there. I want to bring in another question here. You know, we heard a few moments ago from Erin. She mentioned that when white clients come into her salon, they stop any discussions about race. Now, here's a question from Colleen from Westford. She's asking, do you think that there are more white people taking responsibility to help other white people learn and move forward with anti-racist action? So not this conversation that we've been having, this interaction between people of color and white people, but white people educating each other. Mm-hmm. Jamila?
Me? Oh, I'm up.
Well, everybody's up, the whole show.
That's the hope. That's the hope. The hope is that, there are some tables, spaces, institutions that I can't stand in, right? I'm not at your dinner table. And that's really, really important for folks to understand. That's what I encourage. A lot of white people that I work with that are excited about the work are excited about doing this work in Black and brown communities. And I'm like, your people in them, you got to get to your community, right? Because those are spaces that I can access. And if that education is not happening in that way, then those people holding so much power in our nation, there's a different kind of influence and work that has to happen in that way. So the hope is that is what's happening, so that we could move beyond a performative outrage of racism and the actual work happening at dinner tables that we might never see.
Shirley, your thoughts on
I had
this?
Can I just say
yes
and yes to that? Some of, and I'll start by saying that, some of my strongest allies in this racial justice work are white folks. But to Jamila's point, I think it's critically important that that when white allies, those who want to be white co-conspirators, get into this work, that they're not just solely focused on saying that they want to be around Black and brown folks to do the work. Because, and just to double click on what was said, there are white spaces that we don't even know about that need to be touched by this work. And just as we talk about, the relationship piece is critically important. And in many respects, white people can be trusted ambassadors in this work within predominantly white spaces. And again, because of power dynamics, can in some respects be even more effective than people of color in moving this work in predominantly white spaces.
Shirley?
Dan, I was going to add, we can't dismantle systemic racism without white people. They are still by and large in charge, and we need white people at the table, from boardrooms to the dinner tables, to change America. Can I tell you one little tiny story? Sorry, I can't help my report.
It's okay. You came prepared. You came prepared with your stories.
Well, I want to talk about the dinner table. I recently was interviewing a Comcast executives, and Comcast, like many other organizations, many other businesses, had town halls, right, where they had Black employees open up about their experiences and telling their stories. What Tanisha and Jamel talk about, the importance of telling their stories, and so that happened. So then what happened was, they were telling me the story. Then they had a white employee, a father who was so moved by what he learned from his Black colleagues. Like, I had no idea this is what it's like to be Black in America. So then he sat down and talked to his family, his kids, about this. And then his college-age daughter was like, wow. And then she started to look around her own circle. And she said, you know what? My sorority is not diverse at all. I'm going to change that, And, sometimes we think these, what happens, these town halls, they don't have, what kind of impact do they have? But they do have the ability to change kind of one family, one heart at a time. And that's what we need in America. We need big policy changes, and then we need changes at the dinner table, one by one. That's what will dismantle systemic racism.
And those little moments of progress will add up over time.
Dan, can I please say something very quickly?
Sure, and then I have another question I want to move on to here, but
Just
go ahead.
Because, you know, as much as that moves me, I think it's also important for us to think about what scholar Eve Tuck speaks about, the damage-centered narratives that we often rely on in order to move white people. So oftentimes it becomes that in order to move white people to change, it is the damage, the wounds, the pain, the trauma of people of color that they need to witness. And that's the same labor that we're talking about, right? And so that same scholar speaks about what it means to push us to desire-based narratives, to the beautiful things about us, knowing that we have a lot of recorded history about our pain and trauma, but being put in that space to have to relive that and evoke that in order to educate white people can be very, very harmful. I just want to name that there's a both and a complexity to how that might work.
So true. I want to move on to another question now from Tony in Boston and then Maureen in Seekonk. They want to know how best to address the issue of reparations. Who wants to take that one?
We need to start. Yes, indeed. You know, certainly many of us know at the federal level, HR 40 is moving, hopefully moving through Congress, which is, you know, a bill that would establish a commission to study reparations, to really lay bare the historical record. I absolutely believe that is critically important work, but I would submit that we can and should be doing the same in our local communities. You know, and in fact, we look forward to here in Boston with the NAACP working in partnership with some of our elected officials at taking a very close look at this issue and seeing what we may be able to do here to really look at the historical record and determine what repair, because that's what reparations is about, what and accountability, going back to the earlier conversation, what repair may be necessary for us to be whole as a community and truly be able to move forward. I think this critically important work and conversations that need to be had there.
Jamila, any additional points to that on that question of reparations?
Retweet. That's all I got to say. I echo all of that.
You said retweet?
Retweet. Everything. I totally, that's it. That's exactly it. I can't even add to it.
That's the first time that I've had that as a response, but it worked, right? It really worked. Okay, switching to another.
Because you know we have a doctor in the house.
That's right. So retweet, like, whatever. Okay, switching to another key issue. Shirley, as the Globe's business reporter, can you give us an update on how the business community has been reacting to this year of reckoning?
So a year ago, we had all these corporations issue statements about George Floyd. They also committed, probably collectively, billions of dollars to eliminate racial inequities. And I recently did a piece on this, and I think turns out that was the easy part, actually pledging money. The really difficult work begins now. What do we do with all that money? How do we spend it? What works? What doesn't work? What should we fund? And I just want to highlight, give one example. Bank of America, they, few companies gave more, pledged more than Bank of America. They gave about over $1 billion over 4 to 5 years to eliminate disparities. And one of the things they decided to do was typically since being a bank, they would issue loans, right, to minority businesses to help them grow. But they've always been doing that, and still there's a huge racial wealth gap in this country. So they decided we need to think differently. And when they gathered all their executives and they said, what could we do differently? They decided, you know what, we are going to give money to minority-owned venture capital firms and let them give money to small businesses, minority-owned businesses. And the idea is that oftentimes when you have a business that is about to grow, right, they're just starting out. They need money from the bank, but that's also the exact moment when the bank won't lend them money because they're deemed too risky. And so a lot of these small minority-owned businesses can't grow because of that. And so now Bank of America, they've given $250 million towards these equity investments in minority-owned venture capital firms, including one here in Boston called Visible Hands. And so I think that's a new way of thinking, and that's what I'm excited about when I think about corporate America and their pledges. How can we do things differently? And I think what's also exciting is that it's less about philanthropy and charity and more about helping build up the Black community, whether it's in small businesses or in other ways, but it's not about just plugging holes. It's about how do we really build something different and build something sustainable. And that also means the money probably hasn't, has maybe been doled out a little bit more slowly because companies want to be more thoughtful. They're looking at how do we build the pipeline of Black executives who can sit on boards, because if you have more Black board members, they can really drive diversity and change from the top. But of course, that doesn't happen overnight, right? That takes some you got to plant some seeds, and that will take a little time. But I do feel like corporate America is trying. They're trying to do something different with the acknowledgement that what they've done before hasn't been quite as effective, hasn't been effective.
And I would certainly add that we have seen a lot of companies, move out some older, long-seated board members and bring in people of color. And so, yes, it is a long process to make it happen, but we've seen a lot of movement in that area. Another question from one of our viewers.
Can I just touch on that piece? Because yes. I agree with everything that Shirley said, and I do think that the investments that many companies have made are critically important, both from a hiring standpoint as well as kind of a financial resource standpoint, investing in communities of color, specifically the Black community. But I actually think there's more to it, particularly in the United States. I think it's critically important for more companies to engage in these conversations, these public policy conversations that are happening, and for more corporations to lend their power and influence to moving public policy that is designed to improve the quality of life for people of color. So when we think about, for example, voting rights laws, right, that are being that are before many state legislatures, 43 state legislatures across the country, or as we're thinking about even criminal justice reform, as we talked about earlier, I think there is a critical role for the business community to play in the public policy conversations as well.
Good point. Another question I want to move on from one of our viewers relates to education. Of course, COVID made the inequities there even more stark. Dr. J, can you address this issue of education, starting off with the question from Peter of Gloucester? What are the most important next steps in improving urban education? It seems nothing has changed in the past 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely talk about that as it relates to what needs to not be reformed, but transformed so that things can actually change in the system of education. What this pandemic has exposed in our systems and maybe exacerbated has already existed. And there's a lot of conversation now about returning to normal. And if that is what we do, then we're going to perpetuate the harm. We become complicit. What needs to happen is those things that have been exposed in this moment need to be addressed at a systemic level. The disparities that are becoming extremely clear need to be addressed. And so if there's not that policy, those change in policy, this institutional level change that needs to happen in order to address the disproportionate outcomes that come for Black and Brown youth in inner city communities, then our education system is just going to be more of the same. And there are many people, again, on the ground who are doing that work and imagining powerful futures that rest on justice and new kinds of freedom.
Okay, another audience question. DEI commissions are being formed in predominantly white communities. How can these groups in towns like mine begin to facilitate real change? Who wants to take a stab at that question?
I think we touched on it earlier.
Yeah, who wants to be?
Right?
Yeah, we did.
In terms of, those are very important. What I would just say, what I would add though, is that, folks make sure that they are doing the work to learn. And that, to learn about the issues and not make assumptions about the issues. And so that folks are taking the time to learn. And most important, that folks are really following the lead of people of color, and specifically, to the extent that, to the extent that there's an interest in advancing the work specifically for one community or another, for example, the Black community, that you're listening to Black voices and Black leadership in the work as well. So I think it's important work. And I would also suggest that that the group not just be focused on talking about the issues, but really dig deep to identify what can be done within their respective communities to make change. And certainly here in the Commonwealth, I'll give communities something to think about. We have a housing crisis in the Commonwealth. And one of the challenges that we have in addressing that housing crisis are zoning laws and restrictions to building in some of our suburban communities. So if you're really committed to this work, one of the things that I would suggest folks think about is what are you doing to help ensure that your community is inclusive and helping to solve our housing crisis here in the Commonwealth.
Okay, moving on.
Can I add to that just very quickly?
Okay, go ahead.
Because a few weeks ago, I gave a talk called "Empathy is Not Equity," kind of echoing what was just shared about the kind of lip service that can happen, right? Or the kind of emotionality that we sometimes confuse for the work of equity, because a lot of these words are being thrown around these days. And equity is transforming, as you shared in that example, the material conditions of the most marginalized people in our nation. And so when it came to American chattel slavery, the conversation about abolishing it was not about how do we diversify the people who are invested in the system, or how do we include more people in it. We understood that this needs, whatever is harming Black lives in this system needs to be dismantled and abolished. And we have to have those conversations about not just diversifying leadership in systems of harm or trying to include more people of color into systems of harm, but how do we dismantle and transform systems of harm in ways that can truly lead to equity? That's very important work.
Very important indeed. Arguably the most obvious issue we have faced this past year is how COVID-19 disproportionately impacted Black and Brown communities. As Marcela Garcia pointed out recently in the Boston Globe, the vaccine picture tells the story. Wellesley has a vaccination rate of 62%, while New Bedford and Springfield are both at 38%. She adds that within Boston, there are wide disparities, with an 80% rate in the South End, but only 42% rate in Mattapan. The way to rectify that, she says, is to do a better job of meeting people where they are. Now, that approach is definitely working in Chelsea, one of the poorest communities in the state. Vaccine ambassadors are now going door to door, helping to educate those who are reluctant.
Okay, so we're at 75 right now.
These women walk the streets of Chelsea each day from early morning to mid-afternoon, reaching 40 to 50 residences a day, acting as vaccine ambassadors.
Yeah, so
they talk with people about the safety of the vaccine and answer questions.
If you're on the street and we ask you, like we ask those people, have you been vaccinated? Yes, no, and then we can answer questions if they have questions.
Chelsea, with its crowded housing and a population working in low-paying jobs that are deemed essential, has been hit hard. Although many have already been vaccinated, there is still reluctance.
People say, I don't know yet, I'm worried about it. Some people say, I'm waiting to see.
Stacy and the others, paid by the state to go door to door, are trying to pick up the slack for a system that originally failed the people of this city.
Latest COVID funding, how that was allocated, I think Chelsea got like a really small, I don't know the numbers, but Chelsea got like a really small amount.
These street workers are now part of a larger group of community activists, civic leaders, and regular citizens of Chelsea, all dedicated to making things better for everyone, not just on COVID, but on wide-ranging issues of racial inequality. And they seem to be making a difference.
I ran for city council a couple times, and the results I didn't win, but the feeling I had out there was division. The feeling I had out there was racism. The stakeholders here in Chelsea, we're all looking back and saying, okay, we're at the table together. Let's decide what we need to do to make everything work for everybody in the community.
There's a lot of energy right now around diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a lot of hiring when it comes to municipalities, hiring people who are diversity officers.
I think we've progressed drastically. There's been incredible changes throughout the system in terms of public safety and public health.
Right, it's what starts a conversation, and what creates a level of empathy that leads to change, right? Because I think before, when these murders were occurring, there wasn't a general level of empathy across the board. Everyone thought, oh, he stole the Skittles. Oh, he took the money.
People we talked with in Chelsea agree there's a long way to go. But like the vaccine salespeople, they keep knocking on doors with hope in their hearts.
I see the conversation changing across a lot of different rooms and classrooms, and that's great. Like the heightened awareness is amazing.
Kyle says he tells his friends that someday they'll be making movies about this stressful time in our history. Unfortunately, we have to help write the screenplay. Now I want us to key in on two things from that piece, trust and hope. So we'll start with trust. Is it difficult to get people in communities of color to trust the medicine, to trust the vaccine, to trust the politicians, I guess, who are pushing you to get these vaccines when they haven't trusted, leadership for most of them for much of their lives? Is it difficult then to come into a community and say, trust us?
100%.
Yes, it is. But I actually want to, I want to lift up and model something that Jamila said earlier about, kind of really the joy and the bright spots and the resiliency of our community. One of the things that we've seen certainly illustrated in that example with what's happening in Chelsea and the people of Chelsea being self-determinative as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic and having access to the vaccine. We've seen the same here in Boston with the Black Boston COVID-19 Coalition. We've seen it in Springfield with the Black Springfield COVID-19 Coalition. We've seen across the Commonwealth, communities of color deciding for ourselves that we are not going to wait for or rely on government to do the right thing, that we are going to make sure that our communities understand all that they need to know about this virus, that they have access to testing, that we have access to vaccines. And so it has been disappointing in many respects how hard we've had to fight for equity and access during the healthcare access during the pandemic. But on the flip side, as communities of color, I'm thinking about Gladys Vega, right, in Chelsea, right? As communities of color, we knew going in that this was not going to be easy. And so very early on, communities started organizing to ensure that we would be taking care of ourselves. And so while there's still more work to be done, I do want to lift up that, that we've seen the type of the levels of vaccination rates that we have in the urban core, primarily because of community-driven work. And it would be much worse but for the work that's been happening on the ground.
Jamila.
Again, another retweet. That's I
knew
I knew when I saw you at the top with your device, I knew you were going to be busy on social media. Go ahead.
No, it is because, at the end of the day, we have no reason to trust, right? Actually, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a scientist, a doctor in France who mentioned the possibility of testing Africans with some of the original vaccines. Like, just that came out, right? And we understand the history in this nation in particular of the medical industrial complex and Black communities. We understand that. And so with that history, we have no reason to trust, but I really deeply echo the self-determination that has come with us making informed decisions about whether or not we want to participate in what is unfolding right now. Thank you for lifting that up. Thank you.
And Shirley, have you heard those same kinds of stories of hope? The piece ended with this sense of some things are getting better, or there are things that will happen that will make things better. Are you hearing that as well as you've been talking to people out on the streets?
I mean, Chelsea itself, beyond the vaccine, they during the pandemic, they were the biggest experiment in the country for what is known as guaranteed income program. There were 2,000 families that got a few $100s a month, on a debit card. And, this is the idea that Andrew Yang had popularized during the presidential campaign, the idea of, a universal basic income. And through public and private partnership, Chelsea became the country's biggest experiment of this. What would happen if we gave the poorest households no strings attached cash for, 6 months? Would it be enough to help them get back on their feet, not only put food on the table, but, perhaps the beginnings of, changing their lives and moving up and getting a new job. And think about during this idea of free money to the poorest households, it's been debated for decades, right? No one said we can't do that. We can't give money to low income households. They don't know how to spend it. But in Chelsea, we've seen they spent it wisely. They spent it on food, they spent it utilities and other bills. They did not waste it. And so, and now you're starting to see a movement. Now, City of Cambridge is also going to do a guaranteed income program. So there's a lot to be, there is hope. And those kind of programs are finally being talked about locally and nationally. And that's the kind of repair that can happen in these communities of color. And so there is hope because we've hit almost like we've hit rock bottom. And so we got to do something transformative to leap back up.
Well, before we say goodnight, a final note from Makita, our Fall River teacher.
I hope that we can one day be in a space without someone looking at someone else that's probably Black or darker skin and probably have a fear within their heart that something is going to happen. I just hope that one day we can just stand with one another and have no type of judgment behind it. I hope one day we can just wave that wand and say, yes, the people that is running our country are relatable and they understand people in the middle class or in the lower class or people of color or the LGBT community. And we can all, live with our differences, but not be seen as different.
It's a positive way to end tonight's program with a big smile and a ray of hope. Thanks to all of you for joining us for the State of Race, and thank you to our wonderful panelists, Tanisha Sullivan, Dr. Jamila Liscott, and Shirley Leong. Before viewers depart this evening, we'd really appreciate your feedback on the State of Race. You'll see a survey pop up in the chat tab in Zoom right now and in the comment section on Facebook and YouTube. It will also appear on your screen as you exit tonight's event. You can also watch all our past State of Race forums on gbh.org/the State of Race. We hope to continue evaluating our state of race and hope you do as well. Thank you and good night.